Have you ever wondered if everything you thought was real, your sense of self, the world around you, and the experiences you hold dear, might actually be an illusion? What if all these things were empty of inherent existence? While this idea might sound like the premise of a science fiction movie, it is one of the most profound insights found in Buddhist philosophy. The concept is called Shunyata, or emptiness, and it has the potential to completely transform the way we perceive ourselves and the world. Emptiness, in the context of Buddhism, doesn't mean that nothing exists. It's not about nihilism or despair. Instead, it refers to the fact that nothing exists independently of other things. Everything arises due to causes and conditions, and nothing has a fixed, permanent essence. Understanding emptiness helps us to see the interconnectedness of all things, frees us from mental suffering, and allows us to live with greater flexibility and compassion. By the end of this exploration, you might find that many of the things you believe to be solid truths are, in fact, fluid and ever-changing. This realization can be incredibly freeing, helping you to live with a deeper sense of peace, openness, and connection to others. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Self. No subject. One of the most fundamental teachings in Buddhist philosophy is the idea that the self, the I that we identify with, is not as real as it seems. Most of us go through life with a strong sense of being a continuous, solid self. We feel as though there is a me inside that persists through all of our experiences. But according to Buddhist teachings, this sense of self is an illusion. In the Shunyata Sutta, the Buddha said that the world is empty of self and anything belonging to the self. At first, this idea might seem confusing or even disturbing. After all, if there is no solid self, who is having these thoughts and feelings? Who is experiencing life? The Buddha's point was not that we don't exist at all, but that the self we cling to, the one we feel is permanent and unchanging, is actually a construct. It is made up of constantly shifting thoughts, emotions, memories, and sensations. There is no central, unchanging core that defines who we are. The music analogy. One way to understand this concept is by thinking of a piece of music. When you listen to a song, it seems like a unified, solid experience. But where does the music exist? Is it in the instrument, the musician, the airwaves, or your ears? In reality, the music is a combination of many different factors. The musician plays the instrument, producing sound waves that your brain interprets as music. The music itself doesn't have an independent existence. It arises from the interaction of various causes and conditions. Similarly, the self is not a single, solid entity. It arises from the interaction of your body, mind, environment, and experiences, but has no inherent, permanent existence. The rainbow analogy. Another analogy often used in Buddhist teachings is the rainbow. When you see a rainbow after a rainstorm, it appears to be a beautiful arc in the sky. But if you try to approach it or grasp it, it disappears. The rainbow exists only because of the interaction of sunlight, moisture in the air, and your position as the observer. It has no solid, independent reality. In the same way, the self exists because of the interaction of various conditions, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and environmental factors. It has no inherent, unchanging essence. This insight might sound unsettling at first, but it can actually be incredibly freeing. We spend much of our lives worrying about who we are, trying to protect our ego, and striving to maintain a certain image. But once we realize that the self is just a convenient fiction, we can let go of these anxieties. We can embrace life with more openness, knowing that we are not fixed, unchanging beings, but part of a constantly evolving process. The dream character analogy. Think about the experience of dreaming. When you're in a dream, the you in the dream feels very real. You interact with others, experience emotions, and move through the dream world as if it were solid. But when you wake up, you realize that the dream self was just a temporary creation of your mind. It had no independent existence. The same is true in waking life. The self we identify with is like a character in a dream. It arises from the mind's processes and is dependent on various conditions, but it has no ultimate independent reality. Understanding this can help us let go of the constant effort to protect and defend our sense of self. We can live with more ease and compassion, recognizing that we are not as solid or separate as we once thought. Chapter 2. The emptiness of objects. No object. If the self is empty of inherent existence, what about the objects we interact with every day? Are they any more solid or permanent than the self? According to the Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna, the answer is no. Just like the self, objects in the world around us are also empty of inherent existence. This doesn't mean that objects don't exist at all, but rather that they don't exist independently. They arise due to causes and conditions, and they have no permanent, unchanging essence. At first glance, this might seem counterintuitive. After all, the chair you're sitting on feels solid, right? You can touch it, sit on it, and move it around. But if you examine it more closely, you'll see that the chair is not as solid or permanent as it appears. The chair is made up of materials like wood, metal, or fabric, which were once part of the earth. These materials were shaped into a chair by human hands, and one day, the chair will break down and return to its basic components. The chair exists only because of a long chain of causes and conditions, and it could easily cease to exist or change into something else. The example of a meal. To make this idea more relatable, let's take the example of a meal. When you sit down to eat, the food on your plate seems like a distinct, independent object. But where did it come from? The ingredients were grown in the soil, harvested by farmers, and transported to your kitchen. The dish was prepared using a recipe, which may have been passed down through generations. The meal you're eating is the result of countless interconnected processes, natural elements, human effort, cultural traditions, all coming together to create the dish. The meal has no independent existence. It's part of a vast, interconnected web of causes and conditions. Understanding the emptiness of objects helps us see the interconnectedness of all things. Every object we encounter, no matter how solid it appears, is dependent on other things. When we realize this, we can let go of attachment to objects and stop seeing them as permanent, unchanging things. Instead, we can appreciate the fluid, interconnected nature of reality. Chapter 3. No subject and no object. The unity of experience. So far, we've explored the emptiness of the self, no subject, and the emptiness of objects, no object. But there's an even deeper insight in Buddhist philosophy. The very distinction between subject and object, the idea that there is a you observing the world out there, is itself an illusion. In our everyday experience, we tend to think of ourselves as separate from the world around us. We see a tree, for example, and we assume there is a clear boundary between me and the tree. But according to the Yogacara school of Buddhism, this way of thinking is fundamentally mistaken. In reality, the subject, the observer, and the object, the thing being observed, arise together. They are not separate entities, but are part of the same process. The color red example. To understand this better, think about the experience of seeing the color red. In our ordinary way of thinking, we believe there is a you who sees the red color, and the red color exists out there in the world. But in reality, the experience of seeing red and the color red itself arise together. The red color doesn't exist independently of your experience of seeing it, and your experience of seeing it doesn't exist without the red color. They are two sides of the same coin, completely interdependent. The dance of interdependence. Another way to think about this is to imagine two dancers moving together in perfect harmony. It would be impossible to say that one dancer is moving independently of the other. Their movements are intertwined, each influencing the other. In the same way, the subject, the observer, and the object, the observed, are not separate entities. They arise together in a single moment of experience. This insight can radically shift the way we see the world. When we drop the illusion of separation between subject and object, we can begin to experience life as a seamless whole. We are not isolated individuals, cut off from the world around us. We are part of the larger dance of existence. Chapter 4. The Ground of Being, the Buddha. Nature within. If everything is empty, if both the self and the objects around us lack inherent existence, does that mean life is meaningless? Far from it. In Buddhism, emptiness is not about nihilism or despair. Instead, it points to the boundless, interconnected nature of reality and the potential for awakening within each of us. Buddhist philosophy speaks of Buddha nature, which refers to the innate wisdom, compassion, and clarity that exists within all beings. This nature is not something we have to acquire or achieve. It is already present within us. However, it is often obscured by our delusions, attachments, and misconceptions. The sky analogy. Think of Buddha nature like the sky. No matter how many clouds cover it, the sky is always there, vast, open, and clear. Similarly, our true nature, our Buddha nature, is always present, even when it is temporarily obscured by the clouds of our thoughts, emotions, and attachments. Awakening to our true nature. When we begin to understand emptiness and see through the illusion of the self and the objects around us, we can start to awaken to our true nature. This awakening doesn't mean that we stop experiencing challenges or difficulties in life, but it does mean that we can approach life with a greater sense of freedom and openness. Rather than being caught up in defending or protecting our ego, we can live with more ease, knowing that we are not bound by a rigid, unchanging sense of self. We can engage with the world from a place of compassion, knowing that we are deeply interconnected with all beings. The teachings on emptiness may seem challenging at first, but they offer a profound path to liberation. When we see through the illusion of the self and recognize the interconnectedness of all things, we can let go of our attachments, anxieties, and rigid views. We can embrace life with more openness, flexibility, and compassion. Emptiness is not a bleak or nihilistic concept. It is a teaching that helps us see the fluid, dynamic nature of reality. It reminds us that we are not separate, isolated beings, but part of a larger whole. This understanding can transform our relationships with ourselves, others, and the world around us, opening the door to greater wisdom, compassion, and freedom. Ultimately, the concept of emptiness invites us to see the world as it truly is, not as a collection of fixed, independent things, but as an interconnected, ever-changing process. By understanding this, we can live more fully, embracing the richness and beauty of life without getting caught in the traps of attachment and suffering. As we continue our journey through life, the teachings on emptiness can serve as a guide, helping us navigate the challenges and joys we encounter. By letting go of the illusion of a solid, permanent self and recognizing the emptiness of all things, we can find peace, freedom, and a deeper connection to the world around us.